All right, hour 912, I think. I'm not sure. I still got 1 hour and 51 minutes left to go on this trip. If it wasn't for these videos, I'd probably be dead now. So thank y'all. If you don't listen, thank you anyway. You saved my life. So I'm continuing the prophetic, and I don't know where to start, but I can tell you several stories, and I will tell you a couple stories. But let me just say that we're all called to prophesy. We're all called to be trained by the office of the prophet. We're told to seek spiritual gifts, especially prophecy. And there's basically three parts to prophecy. There is the word of knowledge, which is knowing something you cannot possibly know unless God tells you. There is the word of wisdom, which is kind of knowing what to do with the word of knowledge. And then there is the prophetic word, which is foretelling, forthtelling, encouragement, and all that kind of stuff, and then foretelling some things that may occur in somebody's life. But scripturally, we're all called to seek the gift of prophecy. Now, you cannot prophesy unless you first hear God, either by word of knowledge, word of wisdom, or a foretelling or forthtelling of a word that God gives you. And that's one way to develop the hearing of God, is to pray for people and see what God says. So if you're praying for somebody, and so I was a part. So Robert Buckner, who's a friend of mine, who's on my group page, if you're from Starkville, you probably know him. They started what was called a healing room a few years ago, and they went through a training. And what we did is people would come and we would pray for them. And typically in praying with people, God will tell you something. God will just tell you something that you don't know. I just one example. It was one girl I was praying for, and we don't want to know, so we don't actually ask many questions on the healing room. We don't say, tell us what's too much, because we want to hear what God says. So I just remember one occasion the girl was there, and I don't remember what she said she was being prayed for, but I just heard something about her being a mama to her mama. And I just asked her, I said, are you trying to be a mama to your mama? And she burst into tears, and we went through that, and then we prayed through all that. And then I heard the same thing about her sister. I said, do you have a sister that's older than you? And you're mommy and her in some way. And of course she burst into tears. And so that's a word of knowledge. I didn't have any way to know that. And then, the next thing is, what do you do with that information? And so that's a word of wisdom you're looking for. And then what does God want to say going forward in their lives? Not just the issue, but what does God want to call forth? Or how does he want to encourage them? So prophecy, the general gift of prophecy, is for encouragement, edification, and comfort. And so most prophecies are not negative, they're positive. God's calling you forward, and that's the nature of God, and I believe that's the nature of the general prophetic gift that we should all operate in. A prophet may jump into, or you may step into that office for a minute, may jump into calling out, 20 years from now. I don't know. I think I'm more prophetic than I am a prophet. I do get the words of knowledge. I do get the words of wisdom. I do have some encouraging prophetic words for people's lives, but not often do I call forth a life word. But that's part of the church, and we're all called to do that. And so that's one way to hear God, is to actually go out and step out and start praying for people and trust God to give you something. The other thing is to be receptive to what God's put in place, which is to be receptive to the prophetic. And that's one thing, I don't know why, but I like for people to pray for me, and I suck it out of them. If they don't even feel prophetic, they'll start prophesying, and like, what happened, because I don't know, I just believe in the prophetic. I was touched by it early, and I remember, Bill Lawler praying for me. Me and Shannon went over, we were just married, no kids, and I said, I want you to pray for us. And so he and his wife prayed for us, and I don't remember if it was him or his wife. Before it was over, they were prophesying us being old surrounded by children, spiritual children, natural children, grandchildren, natural grandchildren. I mean, and when it was over, Bill said, I didn't even know I had all that in me. He said, you know, but we didn't know we were going to have any children. You know, now we have 10, and I guess at some point we'll have grandchildren. I've got an orphan ministry. I've got several spiritual children that's through the orphan ministry, and that was a life word that I feel like we pulled it out of them because we were hungry for it. So if you're closed to the prophetic, you're not going to get much of it. But if you're open to it, God is willing to speak, and He wants to speak. And so, you know, the prophetic comes through prophetic people. And so, just, you know, I'll just tell you, I told you John Duke's story. I'll tell you two more real quick, 552. So Andy Glover, who's on my page, I didn't know Andy. Robert invited me to an event where Andy was preaching, and I had done a couple years with the orphan ministry through another ministry, and I had decided I wasn't going to do it. I felt like God was pulling me out of associating with that ministry, and I felt like God was going to actually do something, but I had no idea what or how, and I wasn't trying to make it happen. I had only been back for maybe a month or a few weeks actually from the last trip, but I just felt like on that trip I was you know, we were not going to be compatible in the long term, and I didn't want to you know, I don't believe in being like an Absalom or something like that where I'm competing, you know, so I just felt like God's going to do something different, and I'm just going to wait. Well, about a month later, I go to this little meeting. Andy's preaching, and after he gets through preaching, he starts calling people out. He just looks out, and there wasn't but maybe 30 or 40 of us in the room, but he'd say, y'all two stand up, you know, and a couple stood up, and he began to prophesy. And it seemed like what he was saying, it was about the third time he told me and Shannon to stand up. And I'll just tell you, actually, Joyce Holland has it on video, but somewhere on his phone. But Andy almost fell down when he started prophesying. He backed up a couple of steps. He's whoo, and he began to tell us about our calling. And this is something God's told us many times. He told us, you know, that we were, you know, wrestling with it, and we were in transition, and that, you know, God was going to clarify it, that the calling was there, and that 1 year from today it would all be clear. And that's not exactly the word, but pretty close. And we felt it. We felt it in our spirit. We felt it in our hearts. He felt it. We felt it. And then he did that to a few other people, and God was moving in the room. Well, anyway, the word meant a lot to me, but you know, that was in September. Well, in February, we started our ministry. And in September of the next year, we launched it officially. And afterwards, I remembered the word about the date. And it was actually Labor Day weekend both times. And God put his stamp on it through a prophetic man who I think is a prophet. I've watched Andy. If I get in trouble, I'm calling Andy. I'm calling Ron. I'm calling Andy, and they're going to pray for me. Ron, you know, I mean, I was in a terrible spot with business, and Ron prophesied prosperity when everything looked like doom, and he was right. He was right. He put a number on it, and the number was right. And you know, I've had so many of these encounters, and if you haven't, you know, the only thing is you just need to open your heart up to it. If you don't believe it's possible, then you may not see it. But God speaks through men of God, and I just would encourage you to open your heart. So we had John, we had Andy, we had Ron. That we'll just do those three and leave that at the prophetic. All right, thank you.